This is the Nothing Phone 2. While being a newer tech company, the minds behind it are not. Carl Pye, the founder of the company, was also the co-founder of the company OnePlus. And the whole purpose of starting the Nothing brand was to make tech less boring. Well, what about the camera? Let's see if they succeeded in making an unboring camera. The specs of the camera are the Sony IMX 890 for the main sensor, which is shared by the OnePlus Open that I just reviewed. It's a CMOS sensor that offers some pretty incredible performance as we saw last time, but Nothing doesn't share the same partnership that OnePlus does with Hasselblad, so the camera will be tuned a little bit differently. How I review cameras on phones is based on straight performance from the sensor. I use the camera like I would my full-frame camera, so all judgments will be based on the best performance possible from those sensors. For video, I shot all footage on the Motion Cam Pro app with a mix of ProRes 422 and Cinema DNG files. Motion Cam is by far the best way to get the peak performance out of your phone's camera. It's a paid app, but I have no sponsorship or affiliate or anything like that. It's just software that I stand behind. Taking a look at the footage, you can see again its impressive dynamic range. This is inside the High Museum in Atlanta, and it isn't always exactly the brightest environment at all times, but the sensor was able to capture about as much light as I would expect from some of my larger cameras. Though again, as usual on a tiny sensor like this, if you were to attempt to recover a ton of detail from the shadows on a poor exposure, you would introduce a lot more noise. A lot of which I noticed on this camera were very similar to that of the OnePlus Open, which of course makes sense when comparing the two because they are sharing the same sensor. It does make you question how much of a role Hasselblad plays in the tuning of the sensors as opposed to just a simple color profile. Image sharpness looks good, though it does lean a little bit slightly on the softer side for a more natural look, which I don't mind at all because if you really need it, you can always add that sharpening later, which is all that the image processing does with camera JPEGs to begin with anyway. One thing you don't get on this camera is a telephoto lens. This was definitely for cost savings reasons, since typically the best camera is the main 24mm lens, the main camera, so that they put all the cost into the lens you're probably going to use the most. And that's usually what people tend to rely on when taking their pictures. And then usually if people need a zoom on their image, they tend to just crop in from there, especially if you're going from a higher megapixel camera. The other front-facing camera is the 14mm equivalent ultra-wide lens, which is oddly enough not an IMX sensor, but a Samsung sensor. Editing the raw images in Lightroom is a pretty good experience overall, as long as you get as close to the correct exposure as possible in the settings, you'll get a really good looking image. As usual, the tiny sensors don't have as much wiggle room for recovering the shadows, though the RAWs on this camera seem to do well in highlight recovery. Look at this photo on the outside. Unedited to edited. There still is some room in post. But I did notice some unusual looking noise in the shadowed areas when trying to recover. This is a little rougher than the typical color speckled gook. And there are some strange blocky patterns I'm not used to seeing when you push some of those shadows too far, though it does clear right up in Lightroom with the denoise tool. Overall, as before, I'm still impressed with the IMX 890 sensor. All the pictures we got inside the museum looked great, even the areas with more challenging light. I kind of wish this was a full review of the phone in general, because I love so many things about this phone. But this one is focused a bit more onto the cameras. I love the direction this young company is taking, and I can't wait to see what they bring to the table with the Nothing Phone 3.